What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Cinema Corner. My name's Josh, and today I'm going to be reviewing Shelby Oaks, which is the feature debut from Chris Stuckmann. And if you don't know who Chris Stuckmann is, he basically started out doing exactly what I'm doing right now. He was one of the earlier pioneers of YouTube film criticism. I actually met Chris last month at the Horror Hound convention in Cincinnati, where he held a Q&A session and showed us a brief clip from the film. If I'm remembering correctly, this does hold the record for biggest crowd-funded horror movie of all time. I think it's just specific to the horror genre. That's pretty impressive, and I myself am among the, I believe, 14,000 backers who helped fund this thing. I really like Chris, and from what I witnessed during his Q&A, I think he seems very genuine, and he's extremely appreciative of all of the long-running support from his viewers and the people that helped make this movie happen. And Chris's real-life childhood story about going from Jehovah's Witness kid who made home movies in his backyard to having directed a feature film that is getting a theatrical release by Neon. It's pretty awesome. And he made it clear that this is a very personal project for him, and he actually drew inspiration from his real life and his relationship with his sister, with whom he was estranged for many years because of the involvement with the church. And that's really cool. I love when people take their real life passions and inject them into their movie scripts. Now, with all that said, I am going to be very transparent about the fact that I'm going into this with the idea of evaluating this movie without any biases. I'm going to evaluate it the way I would any other film. I always strive to be as objective as possible. Maybe objective is the wrong word because my opinions are, of course, subjective. They are the way I interpret and see a film. But I'm going to be honest. I'm never going to be dishonest because I have personal stakes in a movie or something in that regard. And if I were to direct a movie in 10, 15 years, I would expect most people to do the same for me. So the story of Shelby Oaks follows Mia Brennan, played by Camille Sullivan, who is in an ongoing search for her missing sister Riley, and Riley was the leader of a group of paranormal investigators. The movie is framed as part found footage / mockumentary and part traditional storytelling. I think that was a very inspired choice. I like the marriage of these two distinctly different subgenres of horror, and there's a specific moment, or at least a specific scene, in which the film shifts from one of these styles to the other, and I thought it was very well executed. I've been watching Chris's videos for probably almost a decade, and some of his influences here are incredibly obvious. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I'm just pointing out that it does share similarities to a couple of films, specifically Hereditary and Blair Witch. I feel like there are elements from both of those films incorporated into this conglomerate, which was a great idea. There's even a specific moment in which a character is standing on a porch at night investigating, and suddenly the sound of crickets chirping abruptly stops. And the first thing that I thought is, yep, that's Signs by M. Night Shyamalan. And lo and behold, Stuckmann has cited Shyamalan as one of his inspirations. I thought that was a cool little Easter egg, if that was meant to be a hat tip to Shyamalan. So what we have here is basically a very atmospheric, investigative, missing persons film with some jump scares, not many characters, and a slower pace. I really dig the creepy, abandoned, foggy forest sets. One in particular that I liked and thought stood out quite a bit is there's a sequence that takes place in an abandoned prison, and Mia is going from cell to cell looking for a specific cell which might relate to Riley's past and why she disappeared. And we watch as she walks from one cell to another, and it really does a good job of building anticipation for her arriving at the cell that we're looking for. There are some jump scares here and there, but Stuckmann has clearly watched a lot of horror movies, and he knows how to subvert expectations. The best thing that he does, at least in terms of the horror elements, is he uses silhouettes in the backgrounds of shots that you would almost miss if you weren't paying close attention. It's creepy. It does a really good job of making you as paranoid as Mia is, and it leaves you with the feeling that you need to be scanning every shot that takes place in darkness because you're expecting to see something standing behind the characters. Unfortunately, the micro budget does show, and I think it also shows that this is Stuckmann's first screenplay. I'm not quite sure that this movie has enough meat on its bones. Probably a good 2/3 of the runtime, once we shift into that traditional storytelling and out of the found footage, is spent following Mia as she explores these abandoned locations, walking around with a flashlight, finding clues, and it does have a pacing that is sometimes too slow for my taste. The sets are good, all these abandoned buildings, and there's an amusement park that has a role in the movie, and I actually had to Google after watching it whether or not Shelby Oaks was a real town in Ohio, because I think Stuckmann did such a good job of creating a mythology surrounding this town and how it became abandoned over the years. But what what hurts it the most, I think, is just the minimalistic storytelling approach. There are very few characters, and when we only have Mia, there isn't much of an option for there to be any interactions with other characters, at least interactions that feel meaningful. She approaches people who may or may not have some ways they could connect her clues with Riley's disappearance, but they're mostly just releasing information to the audience. There's no way for us to connect to the characters because they don't connect with each other. And although there are some creepy sequences, Stuckmann does participate in some tropes that I find to be frustrating. This first one's a bit of a nitpick. Don't get me wrong, I love a final girl drenched in blood as much as the next guy, but one thing that I hate in movies is when characters get sprayed or splashed with blood, and 2 scenes later when they're resting or recuperating, they still have blood all over their face and for some reason have not cleaned up. There is something of that nature that happens early on and it was very distracting. But one of my biggest grievances with Mia as a character, despite the fact that she's very well played by Camille Sullivan, this is a very committed performance, Mia does almost all of her investigating solo, at night of all times. She could easily have brought her husband, or at least bring like a gun or some sort of weapon that guarantees you'll have some form of safety. Her relationship with her husband is left almost completely unexplored, which is another frustrating thing that adds to this minimalism that I got from the storytelling here. Overall, I think the first half is much stronger than the second half. The third act in particular started to lose me with just a series of extremely poor character decisions, unexplained elements in the supernatural area of the story, and an abrupt ending that was a bit dissatisfying for me. It just didn't quite have any payoff despite being a missing persons movie. So all in all, Shelby Oaks is a bit of a frustrating mixed bag. There are things that work very well in here, but it doesn't quite come together as a whole into something that I think is that worthwhile. Now, I do want to remind you that we should absolutely support indie filmmakers because Hollywood is in a place in which it needs fresh voices more than ever. And even though I'm not quite to the point of giving this a positive score, I am absolutely not upset that I saw it and certainly don't regret supporting it financially. Stuckmann shows enough promise here that I'd love to see what he could do with a bigger budget. And when you think about it, plenty of famous, world-renowned directors had flawed debuts, especially when they were restricted with such a small budget. I'm going to give Shelby Oaks 2.5 stars. This is a tough spot to be in because although I didn't get as much out of it as I was hoping for, it may be a very different story for many of you who, like Chris, have a very personal story attachment to the subject matter that he's dealing with here. So if you have any interest in seeing Shelby Oaks, please go out and support it. You know, I don't think you'll regret watching this at matinee price if you're a horror fan. Overall, I still do consider this to be a triumph. The fact that he was able to get this made after years and years of trying to get into the filmmaking space. And once again, he shows a lot of promise here. I'm very curious to see what he does next. I hope he gets the green light to make another project. And if you see Shelby Oaks for yourself, which I hope that you do, be sure to let me know down in the comments what you think of it, what worked, what didn't work, and what are you excited to see Chris do next. Before you take off, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. If you want to see more content like this, I'll catch you guys in the next video. See you later.